Hello.
मराठा विद्यापीठात समाज
Hello.
नाशिक संचलित कर्मवीर बाबा त्याला वाणिज्य आणि विज्ञान महाविद्यालयात राष्ट्रीय स्तरावरील ट्रान्सलेशन अँड लिटरेचर भाषांतर आणि साहित्य या विषयावर वेबिनारचं आयोजन आमच्या महाविद्यालयातील इंग्रजी, मराठी आणि हिंदी विभागाच्या वतीने केलेला आहे. मराठा विद्यापीठ संस्था महाराष्ट्रातील एक नामवंत संस्था असून संस्थेच्या सरचिटणीस माननीय श्रीमती निलिमाताई पवार व संस्थेचे सर्व पदाधिकारी संचालक यांच्या नेतृत्वामध्ये संस्था यशस्वीपणे वाटचाल करीत आहे. कर्मवीर तुळजाबाबा गोवर्धने कला, वाणिज्य आणि विज्ञान महाविद्यालय इगतपुरी हे आदिवासी व ग्रामीण भागातील महत्त्वाचे शैक्षणिक केंद्र आहे. आमच्या महाविद्यालयाच्या वतीने विद्यार्थ्यांच्या सर्वांगीण विकासासाठी विविध उपक्रम राबविले जातात. संस्थेचे संचालक इंजिनियर माननीय श्री भाऊसाहेब ठाकरे, महाविद्यालयाचे प्राचार्य डॉक्टर PR भाबड यांच्या मार्गदर्शनाखाली महाविद्यालय प्रगती व खंबीरपणे वाटचाल करीत आहे. आमचे महाविद्यालय आदिवासी व ग्रामीण भागातील असून देखील आणि विद्यार्थ्यांचा सर्वांगीण विकास यासाठी सतत कार्यशील आहे. कोविडच्या प्रश्नासह आज आपण विविध प्रश्नांना सामोरं जात असताना विद्यार्थी शिक्षणापासून वंचित राहू नये यासाठी आमचे महाविद्यालय
आवाज ठीक से नहीं आ रहा है.
महत्वाचे पाऊल टाकत आहे. ही
कळत नाही काय
हे सांगताना मला आवर्जून या गोष्टीवर भर द्यावयाचा आहे. गेल्या पंधरवड्यात आम्ही महिलांच्या प्रश्नांसंदर्भात व जाणीव जागृतीच्या संदर्भात एका वेबिनारचे आयोजन केले होते. आज गुरुवार दिनांक 23 जुलै 2020 रोजी भाषांतर आणि साहित्य या विषयावर वेबिनार आयोजित केलेला आहे. या वेबिनारमध्ये तामिळनाडू, उत्तराखंड, गोवा या राज्यांसह महाराष्ट्रातील सर्व विद्यापीठातील आणि सर्व जिल्ह्यातील जवळपास 590 पेक्षा जास्त विद्यार्थी, प्राध्यापक आणि अभ्यासक यामध्ये सहभागी झालेले आहेत. एवढ्या मोठ्या प्रमाणात आपण सर्वजण आमच्या विनंतीला मान देऊन सहभागी झालात त्याबद्दल सर्वप्रथम संस्थेच्या वतीने महाविद्यालयाचे प्राचार्य व संस्थेचे संचालक भाऊसाहेब ठाकरे यांच्या वतीने आपले मनपूर्वक स्वागत करतो. या वेबिनारमध्ये रयत शिक्षण संस्थेचे प्राध्यापक डॉक्टर दीपक बोरगावे, मराठा विद्यापीठ संस्थेच्या प्राध्यापिका विनया केळकर तसेच श्रीमती वंदना अत्रे साधन व्यक्ती म्हणून आपल्याला मार्गदर्शन करणार आहेत. या वेबिनारसाठी मॅक्स समन्वयक प्राध्यापक S परदेशी, संगणक विभाग प्रमुख प्राध्यापक चेतन चौधरी, महाविद्यालयातील शिक्षण प्राध्यापक वास्कर, सर्व प्राध्यापक, शिक्षकेतर कर्मचारी यांच्या सहकार्याने हा वेबिनार संपन्न होत आहे याचा आवर्जून उल्लेख करावासा वाटतो. आमचे संचालक व प्रेरणास्थान श्री भाऊसाहेब ठाकरे, महाविद्यालय विकास समितीचे सर्व सदस्य, शालेय व्यवस्थापन समितीचे अध्यक्ष व सर्व सदस्य, महाविद्यालयाचे प्राचार्य व या वेबिनारचे मार्गदर्शक प्राचार्य डॉक्टर PR भाबड सर या सर्वांच्या वतीने मी पुन्हा एकदा मनपूर्वक स्वागत करतो आणि थांबतो. धन्यवाद. यानंतर या वेबिनारच्या आयोजनाच्या संदर्भामध्ये आणि विषयाच्या संदर्भामध्ये आपले मनोगत या ठिकाणी व्यक्त करीत आहेत प्राचार्य डॉक्टर PR भाबड सर. त्यांना आपण सर्वांच्या वतीने विनंती करतो की आपण आपलं मनोगत या ठिकाणी व्यक्त करावं. Good morning, one and all. On the occasion of
Good morning, sir.
I welcome all the participants online. I also welcome the dignitaries, those who are in the form of in person as well as with guides Among them, I would like to welcome Honorable Engineer Bhavsarji Atre, the member of Executive Body of Community Samaj, Secretary Session. I also welcome the resource persons. One of them is very good friend of mine, Dr. Deepak Borgave, who worked for more than 37 years in the Critic Translator. He has been a very good expert and good translator and good reader. We have also another resource person, once that is who rendered human service to Amnesty Samaj, and before that he also contributed a lot to the field of teaching of English language. Vinaya, Kelkar. Welcome all other the experts, those who are online join this webinar. I would like to introduce the guests. I mean,
तुझ्यासारखं हे आहे ना क्लास माझा क्लास सोडता येऊ
त्यांनी साहित्य व भाषा विषयाचे पदवी आणि पदव्युत्तर अध्यापक म्हणून अध्यापन केलेलं आहे. 2016 जुलै ते महात्मा फुले महाविद्यालय पिंपरी चिंचवड पुणे येथून निवृत्त झाले. आणखी त्यांच्याबद्दल डिटेल सांगायचे झालं तर आजचा जो विषय आहे भाषांतर, साहित्य आणि भाषांतर किंवा लिटरेचर अँड ट्रान्सलेशन, तर या बाबतीत त्यांचं काम आज आहे. त्यामुळे राजन जवळ यांची कादंबरी व बळीचा, डॉक्टर सुनील कुमार लवटे यांची खाली जमीन वर आकाश ही आत्मकथा, लोकनेते शरदराव पवार यांचे चरित्र, तथा भोसले यांचे कुमारांचे कर्मवीर ही चरित्रे, डॉक्टर रावसाहेब कसबे यांचे भोस ही पुस्तके त्यांनी मराठीतून इंग्रजीमध्ये भाषांतर केलेली आहेत. त्याचप्रमाणे अलीकडे त्यांनी मराठीमधली कादंबरी आत्मचरित्रात्मक लेखन विस्मरणाच्या गल्ल्या अशा प्रकारचं लेखन केलं. आणि समीक्षेच्या बाबतीमध्ये संवलनिक साहित्य, सभाव्याभ्यास, भाषांतराचं विचार, बेरीजा हे अशा प्रकारचं भाषांतर ट्रान्सलेशन त्यांनी मराठीमध्ये केलेलं आहे. आणि त्याचप्रमाणे त्यांच्या फेसबुकवरती नवीन अशा कविता सातत्याने ते प्रकाशित करत आहेत. बराच मोठा त्यांचा आता प्रोफाईल आहे. परिचय आता वेळेच्या अभावी मी जास्त करून देत नाही, तरी पण सुद्धा मला असं वाटतं प्रेक्षकांच्यासाठी ऑनलाईन ही माहिती पुरेशी आहे. त्यानंतर दुसऱ्या ज्या आपल्याकडे रिसोर्स पर्सन आहेत त्या केळकर मॅडम, त्याबद्दलही आपल्या मराठा विद्यापराषद समाज संस्थेमध्ये विशेषतः सांगण्याची आवश्यकता नाहीये. तरीही सुद्धा बऱ्याचशा गोष्टी काही अशा असतात की त्या सर्वांच्या समोर आणणं अपेक्षित आहे. त्यांच्या करिअरची सुरुवात इंग्लिश लँग्वेज टीचिंग इन्स्टिट्यूट सिम्बायसिस इथून झालेली, फर्ग्युसन कॉलेज जवळ. आणि MUP मध्ये गेल्या 35 वर्ष त्यांनी अशा प्रकारचं शैक्षणिक योगदान या ठिकाणी केलेलं आहे. त्यांचाही व्यासंग दांडगा आहे. शी ऑल्सो ट्रान्सलेटेड पोएम्स, stories for children in various magazines, and she also gave 35 minutes reading session in an international symposium organized at University of East Anglia, Norwich, UK. She also edited books in both fiction and non-fiction, and she has always been very active in academic as well as social activities. So far her career is concerned, and all of us know that the सावाना सार्वजनिक वाचनालयाचं जे नाशिकमधलं चांगलं केंद्र आहे, जे आहे चळवळ आहे एक प्रकारची, त्या चळवळीमध्ये सुद्धा त्या सक्रिय आहेत. आणि त्यामार्फतही त्यांचं एक शैक्षणिक आणि सगळं उपलब्ध झालेले आहेत आणि म्हणून मी महाविद्यालयाच्या वतीनं आणि आपल्या सगळ्या ऑडियन्सच्या वतीनं मी त्यांचं मनपूर्वक स्वागत करतो आणि धन्यवाद देतो. आय वुड लाईक टू थँक बोथ ऑफ देम अँड ऑल्सो थँक ऑनरेबल भाऊसाहेबजी खातडे. Now after this I would like to welcome and request Honorable Bhausabji Khatare be online and just say a few words and wish us best luck through your online speech. So I would like to request him be with us and say a few words about this webinar. And once again, I would like to welcome and congratulate those who are online to enjoy this kind of webinar on literature and translation, Sahitya आणि भाषांतर. Thank you very much.
हॅलो, खत्रे साहेब बोला.
मराठा विद्या प्रसारक समाजाचे कर्मवीर पुंजाबाबा गोवर्धने कला वाणिज्य व विज्ञान महाविद्यालय आणि सावित्रीबाई फुले पुणे विद्यापीठ यांच्या संयुक्त विद्यमाने आज या ठिकाणी ए नॅशनल वेबिनार ऑन लिटरेचर अँड ट्रान्सलेशन या विषयाचं आयोजित करण्यात आलेलं आहे. अतिशय महत्त्वाचा विषय त्या ठिकाणी छेडण्यात आलेला आहे. त्यानिमित्तानं या वेबिनारमध्ये भाग घेतलेले डॉक्टर दीपक बोरगावे, लेखक आणि समीक्षक भाषांतरकार, त्याचप्रमाणे प्राध्यापक श्रीमती विनया केळकर, समीक्षक व भाषांतरकार, श्रीमती वंदना आत्रे, पत्रकार आणि मुलाखतकार, महाविद्यालयाचे प्राचार्य डॉक्टर PR भाबड, उपप्राचार्य गिरी सर, कोऑर्डिनेटर परदेशी सर. अतिशय महत्त्वाच्या विषयावर आज या वेबिनारच्या निमित्तानं या ठिकाणी चर्चा होणार आहे. साहित्य हे समाजाचे डोळे आणि कान आहेत, तर साहित्य हे समाजाचे हृदय आहे आणि या हृदयाशिवाय समाजाची संस्कृती टिकू शकत नाही. आज या ठिकाणी या वेबिनारच्या निमित्तानं नाशिक जिल्ह्याचे सुपुत्र आणि ज्ञानपीठ पुरस्कार विजेते आदरणीय विवा शिरवाडकर तथा तात्यासाहेब शिरवाडकर यांच्या पवित्र स्मृतीचं अभिवादन करून माझ्या या आजच्या उद्घाटनपर शब्दात सुरुवात करतो आहे. आज वयाच्या 14व्या वर्षी ज्ञानेश्वरांनी ज्ञानेश्वरी लिहून समाजाला एक वेगळ्या प्रकारची दिशा देण्याचं काम केलेलं आहे. आजही 800 वर्षानंतर तो एक साहित्य निर्मितीचा एक आदर्श प्रकार आहे. अशा या साहित्यामुळेच आजवर भारताची संस्कृती टिकून आहे. तुकाराम महाराजांनी गाथा लिहून, त्याचप्रमाणे निवृत्ती महाराज अभंग आणि मुक्ताबाईंनी काव्य लिहून या समाजामध्ये या भारताची संस्कृती टिकवलेली आहे. त्यानंतर डॉक्टर बाबासाहेब आंबेडकर, शाहू महाराज, महात्मा फुले यांनीही साहित्याची निर्मिती करून आधुनिक महाराष्ट्राला दिशा देण्याचं काम केलेलं आहे. त्यानंतरच्या काळामध्ये प्रख्य आत्रे असतील, विस खांडेकर, वपू काळे, गदी माडगुळकर, इंदिरा संत या साहित्यिकांनी साहित्याची निर्मिती करून समाजाला दिशा देण्याचं काम त्या ठिकाणी केलेलं आहे. मराठी भाषा ही समृद्ध होण्यासाठी आणि जागतिक पातळीवर मान्यता मिळवण्यासाठी जगातल्या विविध भाषांतलं उत्तमोत्तम साहित्य मराठी भाषेत यायला हवं आणि मराठीतलं उत्तम साहित्य निरनिराळ्या भाषांमध्ये पोचायला हवं व त्यासाठी सर्वांनी प्रयत्न करावेत असं आव्हान वजा विनंती मी आपल्या या सर्व पार्टिसिपेटरना त्या ठिकाणी करतो. भाषांतरामुळे जगाची ज्ञान भाषा ही इंग्रजी आहे. या भाषेमध्ये जेवढं साहित्य आहे तेवढं कोणत्याही भाषेमध्ये नाही. म्हणून मराठी ही जरी आपली मातृभाषा असली तरी ज्ञान भाषेत भाषा त्या ठिकाणी अवगत असणं अत्यंत गरजेचं आहे. भाषांतरामुळे आपणाला वेगवेगळ्या भाषेचं साहित्य आपल्या मातृभाषेत म्हणजे आपल्या ज्ञानभाषेमध्ये वाचायला मिळतं. त्यामुळे निश्चित स्वरूपामध्ये आपला व्यक्तिमत्व विकास होतो, म्हणजेच समाजाचा विकास होतो व पर्यायाने या देशाचा विकास होतो. आजच्या या वेबिनारमुळे अनेक विचारवंतांचे विचार आपणास ऐकण्यास मिळणार आहे. त्यामुळे निश्चित स्वरूपामध्ये या वेबिनारमध्ये भाग घेणाऱ्या सर्व पार्टिसिपेटंट यांना त्याचा लाभ होणार आहे. या वेबिनारमध्ये भाग घेणाऱ्या सर्व पार्टिसिपेटंट यांचे संस्थेच्या वतीनं मी हार्दिक स्वागत करतो. तसेच आजचे सर्व रिसोर्सेस पर्सन यांचेही स्वागत करतो आणि आजच्या या वेबिनारचे उद्घाटन झाले असे घोषित करतो आणि थांबतो. जय हिंद, जय महाराष्ट्र. हॅलो, हा बाबड सर. हा हा चला नेक्स्ट.
हॅलो, आता यानंतर आपल्या समोर डॉक्टर दीपक बोरगावे हे बोलणार आहेत. त्यांनी स्वतःला अनम्यूट करून बोलण्यास सुरुवात करावी. आपल्याकडनं अनम्यूट आहेत ते, त्यांच्याकडनंच म्हणजे त्यांना वोट केलं. हां येतोय आवाज. येतोय सर, येतोय सर.
हॅलो.
हा बोला बोला सर, बोला.
हा, ऐकू येतं ना आता?
हो हो.
Respected Principal Dr. R. Bhavard sir and his staff, the management people, today's all viewers and my dear friends. The title of the webinar is Literature and Translation. But literature is translation. To speak about translation is also to speak about literature. All translations are primarily literature acts. So let me concentrate on a few questions concerned with translation. We can ask why translations are done. Who translates and why? Is translation just a sort of time pass activity? Or are there any cultural, political, ideological, hidden agendas in translation activity? Is it that the translators translate texts because they cannot create their own texts? Which texts are translated? Why does a translated text gets prominence in a particular era? Why religious texts have been translated overwhelmingly across the globe? Is Bible the over-translated text? What transformations and changes do take place through translation processes? Is translation a secondary writing activity? Can translation be faithful to the source text? Is English translations of Marathi poems just a text producing activity in English? Or what is the self-translation phenomenon? There are so many such questions which we can ask, and I wish that I may be able to answer a few of questions. These and many more questions are raised in the translation studies. Translations provide a vital link enabling different cultures to interact.
Probably the most comprehensive data for studying the cultural interactions are the translated texts themselves. The best criticism comes through translation. It would remain confirmed within the boundaries of a native language if it is not exposed through translation to a larger audience. A critic can
बोरगावे सर तुम्ही अनम्यूट करा परत. सर अनम्यूट करा, अनम्यूट करा.
आवाज येत नाही का?
येते येते सर आता बोला.
हा मग बंद झालं का मध्ये? So was there any interruption? Okay, let me continue. I was talking about several questions that are raised in the translation studies. And I said that translations provide a vital link enabling different cultures to interact. Probably the most comprehensive data for studying the cultural interactions are the translated texts themselves. This is the privilege of the translator alone. But the translator can make it function in his native language, literature, and culture. The foreign work can come to life in a different culture through translations only. Its cultural, social, and political reference is important when these texts address to a wider readership. Tagore made extensive modifications in his English translations of the Bangla texts while he translated Gitanjali in order to make them intelligent to the Western readers, eschewing the incomprehensible native items. These are the translation strategies he pursued. Tagore's works are applauded in the West, and its consequences figured in the Nobel Prize in 1913 that we know. Without good translations, works from the past are dead. The contemporary works are introduced to the wider audience through translations. Good translations have the power to bring the past back to life and to integrate them with the present. Therefore, inversals of translation and linguistic multicultural phenomena are the challenges and opportunities in today's speech communities of a globalized and globalizing culture, and the translation studies has an important role to play here. The prolific growth of globalization has accelerated the speed of interferences of languages at large in international realm. Until today, the languages such as Spanish, Russian, and Chinese were beyond the reach of the Indians. Nevertheless, today, the growing need is felt among the Indians to learn them. English came to us through colonization. It has now a history of more than 300 years. The contact with the English language is growing since then, and it is now beyond our control. The contexts of English in India have overwhelming implications in the translation business between the English and the Indian languages. Though some would turn their noses contemptuously against the growing use of English, we need to accept the bitter truth that we cannot survive today without English. Marathi nurtured and developed during the last 300 years in the shadows of English. The growth of Marathi prose and narratives or novel is particularly the overwhelming influence of the English writings. The impact that the English exerted on the Indian languages has been appallingly immense. Bhalchandra Nemade records the impact in his influence study. The influence of English on Marathi is observed not only in terms of lexis, but also in terms of syntax. This impact is still found in one or the other form in our day-to-day life. Today, urban centers and even towns are fairly westernized, and we have accepted innumerable things from the West. The pressures of globalization are beyond our control, and we often entangle ourselves in questions of language. Linguists, thinkers, reformers, culture critics have been worrying about the future of Indian languages. Considering the influence of English upon the Indian languages, we failed to overcome its impact on our cultural psyche. For instance, we failed to erase the English words like railway, table, cup, mug, station, cycle, radio, TV, so on and so forth, used in the contemporary Marathi language. The official efforts of finding Sanskrit substitutes for such words by the purists did not succeed, and the Marathi speech community did not use these words, nor have they accepted them. We do not use the artificially formed word duchaki, for instance, for two-wheeler, particularly in informal language situations. We normally prefer to use either two-wheeler, motorbike, motorcycle, scooter, or even bike. Besides, innumerable distorted forms of English words also remained in the Marathi language. We use their dialectical versions. They are popular among even the illiterate masses of Maharashtra. For example, the word thesan is derived from the English station, kitli from kettle, batli from bottle, tumbrel from tumbrel, and so on and so forth. Several such examples can be given. This has happened in English also. This has been a natural phenomenon in a history of languages, which is known as hybridization. It also happened in our Marathi language. In the beginning of the 19th century, Marathi was under the impact of the Romantic and Victorian English texts, and we find the impact continued during the 20th century. In the 21st century, the phenomenon of hybridization is remarkable. No need to get scared, of course. It is a process of transformation and developmental stage in the history of a language. It happens and has happened to every language of the globe. Some people, especially the purists, worry about the future of the Marathi language and predict the death of the language. Nothing of the sort will happen, because a language dies when its last user dies. So as long as the Marathi speakers are alive, we need not worry about its future and such huge things. Considering the impact of the English language on the Indian languages, one can argue that the seeds of translating business thus have been sown in the colonial acculturation of Indians. We felt its need in varied fields of knowledge. Today, academia, journalism, advertisement, administration, science, technology, and literature are largely dependent on English, or even vice versa. The place of translation in literary studies and criticism is, of course, unprecedented. We attempt translation of Marathi texts into English on a massive scale, but the vice versa journey has a weaker history. This is because there are at least a number of competent translators translating the Marathi text into English. There is no dearth of bilingual writers in Maharashtra, but their English is not so competent that they can venture into the translation area. They know English at the official level. They do not have a sound basis of contemporary and colloquial English. Subsequently, they could not happen to shoulder a multifaceted activity like translation. However, I feel that translations can be produced, translators can be produced on a massive scale, although the situation persists. We should bring about Marathi literature into English, and we need a good number of competent translators to carry out the business. The translation studies, therefore, has received paramount importance during the last few decades. It has now become a significant area of interdisciplinary study for Indians. The translation studies has been growing rapidly in the last several decades. It is now interfacing with a vast breadth of knowledge. It has become a significant instrument of international communication in all branches of human experience. Translation can refer to the subject field, the product, that is the translated text, or the process, the act of producing the translation. Translation in this view is a contextual thing, a cross-cultural communication, or an expressive act. It attempts to transfer the exact contextual and several aspects of the source text and its meaning. Roman Jakobson's concept of interlingual translation is deemed as translation proper. Translation between written languages remains today the core of translation research. During the recent years, research has been undertaken into all types of linguistic, cultural, and ideological phenomena. Today, there are rapid developments and research into audio-visual translation, encompassing sign languages and interlingual subtleties. Approaches developed during the last few decades towards the discipline are outstanding. With the rapid growth of discipline and worldwide translation training programs, diverse forms of translation research has been crossing traditional academic disciplines like linguistics, literary criticism, philosophy, and anthropology. The translation theory has revealed an expanded range of fields and approaches. New trends, particular traditions, disciplines or conceptual discourses began to take roots since 1960s onward. Translation is a threefold phenomenon. The process of translating a written text from source language to a target language conducted by a translator or translators in a specific socio-cultural context. The return product or the target text which results from that process and which functions in the socio-cultural context of the target language. And combining these two elements, the cognitive, linguistic, visual, cultural, and ideological phenomena, which is called translation. One can map the areas of translation to an exhaustive spaces, say for instance, text analysis and translation, the translation process, the translation quality assessment, translation of literary genres, multimedia translations, translation and technology, translation history, translation ethics, translation training, translation as a profession, terminology and glossaries, dictionaries and encyclopedias, and so on and so forth. The translation phenomenon has a huge effect on our everyday life. This can range from anything to anything. Say, for instance, today's pervasive and darkly enveloping phenomenon of COVID-19 situation in our area, state, nation, and across the globe. or a very trivial matter like a music concert pamphlet lying at a restaurant table near your home in a suburb of Pune. Translation is a broad notion. There have been different views towards translation processes, its methods, and quality assessment. One may, for example, talk of translation as a process or a product and identify such subtexts as literary translation, technical translation, subtitling, and machine translation, etc. The reference to machine translation reveals that translation is now no longer the preserve of human translators, but it can replace human intelligence. In more recent decades, translation forms such as audio-visual translation, a written product read in conjugation with an image, or the screen such as cinema, television, or a computer game, sign, music, or dance, etc. This is on the increasing scale. Translation is largely a textual process. It is, in a real sense, an activity of retextualization. It generally begins with a source text and ends with a target text. Therefore, translation variables are textual variables. The text is considered here as the primary object of the study. It seeks to identify regularities and irregularities in the result of the translation. Several factors such as diverse contents of source text, author's intentions, readers' needs and expectations, linguistic and cultural aspects of target text, principles of equivalence, fidelity to the source text, the degree of acceptability in the target language, equivalence of cultural specificity, achievement of coherence and cohesion in target text are considered. The method could initiate, therefore, at a word, phrase, or clause level in terms of linguistic analysis. It would expand, if required, into a cultural study with reference to the transfer. Methods exploited by translators in varied translation situations could be borrowing, KEK, literal translation, transposition, modulation, explication, adaptation, amplification, and so on and so forth. Let me briefly talk about the historical perceptions that the translation studies went through. Sense for sense translation dominated the beginning of the theoretical foundations of translation studies in the Western tradition. 16th and 17th centuries dominated the humanistic curricula. John Dryden revised the classical distinction between rhetorical and grammatical translation. Alexander Fraser Tatler's book, Essay on the Principles of Translation, is the first systematic treatise on translation in English. He defines good translation as producing an equivalent effect that transcends the differences between languages and cultures. A growing body of German commentary presents a striking alternative to the French and English traditions during the 18th century. The German tradition brings an increased self-awareness to translation. Walter Benjamin introduced the autonomy of translation and its status as text derivative. Ezra Pound's search for a stylistic equivalence and analog are modernist. They include philosophical and poetic values. Translation theory and practice in the early 20th century was marked by two competing tendencies: a formalistic interest in technique and a strong functionalism yoking to cultural and political agendas. Influential figures in philosophy, literary criticism, and linguistics consider whether translation can reconcile the differences that separate languages and cultures. The fundamental issues of translatability dominate translation theory. Martin Heidegger recommends a poeticizing strategy that does violence to everyday language. Literary criticism addresses the issue of untranslatability. It emphasizes the impossibility of reproducing a foreign literary text in another language. Vladimir Nabokov, the Russian critic and translator theorist, sees translation as sites of international influence and affiliation. Eugene Nida distinguishes between dynamic and formal varieties of correspondence. Roman Jakobson introduces the semiotic reflection of translatability. He questions empirical semantics by conceiving of meaning not as a reference to reality, but as a relation to a potentially endless chains of signs. He describes translation as a process of recoding, which involves two equivalent messages in two different codes. Linguistics, literary criticism, and linguists, literary critics, and philosophers join in translation as problems of language and culture. Equivalence becomes the most significant concept in the translation theory, but later on, theorists talk about equivalence in terms of denotation, connotation, and even variance of contents. Later, we find that instead of equivalence, shifts are used. They are pragmatic, functional, and communicative. For John Catford, was a shift, he was the first person to use the concept of shift in translation, equivalence. It occurs for a specific source language element. Pragmatic translation involves gradual semantic shifting as translators choose from a number of possible solutions. Functionally, equivalent translation needs to be based on detailed semantic, syntactic, and pragmatic analysis of a foreign text. Pragmatic translator reverbalizes linguistic and cultural features of the foreign text according to the values of the different language and culture. James Holmes, for example, distinguishes between pure and applied translation areas. Translation theory remains heterogeneous field through this period. Steiner's After Babel opposes modern linguistics with a literary and philosophical approach. Linguistic-oriented theorists define translation as functional communication. For Steiner, language is not instrumental in communicating meaning, but constituting in reconstituting it. Susan Bassett, the emergence of the translation studies as a separate discipline, she considers, and it overlaps with linguistics, literary criticism, and philosophy. It explores unique problems of cross-cultural communication. Bassett's approach is to understand practical strategies in relation to specific cultural and social situations. Approaches informed by semiotics, discourse analysis, and post-structuralist textual theory display important conceptual and methodological differences. They agree that translation is an independent form of writing, distinct from foreign text and from text originally written in translating languages. Translating is seen as enacting its own processes of signification. With the rise of post-structuralism, the conception of language as primarily communication becomes a site of uncontrollable polysim, and translation is reconceived not simply as transformative of the foreign text, interrogative, or as Derrida puts it, deconstructive. If translation inescapably reduces source meaning, it also releases target possibilities. This idea recurs in Derrida and Paul de Man. They question the concept of semantic unity, authorial originality. Post-structuralism inspires literary experiments and aims to release the play of the signifier in the translating language. Coming towards the Indian context, Indranath Chaudhary presents formulation of a theory of translation in the ancient India, with the ancient Bhasha history of 5,000 years old civilization. India, being a multilingual country, did not care to develop a well-defined translation theory or discuss, at least concisely, the nature, functions, and principles of translation. Polyglottism in the ancient India was responsible in the development of translating consciousness among the Indians. The Sanskrit scholars despised the literary works produced in the Indian Bhasha. They did not care to translate them into the Sanskrit. The approach of Sanskrit was elitist, and the Bhasha's literature was inferior to the elitist classes. So the Sanskrit was not used for translation. The Bhasha literatures have an outstanding tradition of several centuries. According to Chaudhary, there is a solid base for developing an Indian theory of translation. These possibilities shall enhance the basis of the third world theoretical framework of the third world cultures. Chaudhary shows the creative freedom enjoyed by the medieval Indian reader translators. Dhaneshwari's Bhavartha Deepika was a free translation of Bhagavad Gita. Ganesh Devi finds seeds of an emerging and the complicated Indian theory of translation. It is true that Indian theorists have not done any significant work in the translation criticism as compared to the Western criticism. However, there are a few exceptions like Gayatri Spivak and Harish Trivedi, I suppose. The significance of translation studies is beyond debate. The roles translations play and the issues of power that exert in cultural identity formations underline the increasing importance of translation. Buddhism that originated in India spread out to China and Japan. Translations of the Buddha text from Pali into Sanskrit and later in other major Indian languages produced the possibilities of its spread. The greatest epic Mahabharata has been the amalgamation of several translated texts from many Indian bhasha. According to Suniti Kumar Chatterjee, much of the literature of Sanskrit and the Mahabharata and Puranas is based on a translation substratum from the literatures of Anglo-Aryan languages. They include the languages of born iron, mixed irons, non-irons, and also foreign speakers, the settled groups of people who spoke Greek and Latin even. When Sanskrit attained pan-Indian status, its speakers became reluctant to disclose the translated character of its literary substratum. The Ramayana and Mahabharata were later translated in several major languages of the world. The colonial consciousness of Indians was a socio-political and cultural product. The colonial educational setup and science and technology introduced by the British nurtured the influence of English and American literatures. The translations of Bible in hundreds of languages, translation of the Sanskrit texts and Vedas, and the other Bhasha literatures, for instance, Urdu and Hindi, and many more by the British, with assistance of local scholars, were accomplished for varied reasons. Self-translation is something like a poet is translating his own text. For example, Rabindranath Tagore's translation of Gitanjali is also an important issue in translation studies. It has acquired an independent status in the form as well as in content. It creates intriguing situations in Indian literatures. There are several such examples like Rabindranath Tagore, Binda Karandikar, Arun Kolatkar, and Dilip Chitre, for example, in Marathi modern poetry. And there are several self-translations, and these are very interesting illustrations. In self-translation, we find that a translator takes more freedom because he is translating his own text. And so he has a greater space and license for translating the text into another language, especially in the foreign language. Kolatkar's texts are very interesting in this case, and he has translated several of his poems, where we find that there are lots of differences and departures from the source text. Anyway, see, these are several issues and lots of questions which are connected with translation studies, and translation being a very important and significant area today. I said something, but I actually read out the text, and therefore it must have been a little boring, but I suppose this was one method of presenting ideas. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to receive any of your questions, and as per the arrangements made, we will talk later on. Thank you very much, Dr. Babar and his team. Thank you once again.
Dr. Deepak Borgave just ventilated his idea, and also his experience regarding translation studies. We have set forth a very scenario of translation studies, how translation studies related to tradition, even the socio-cultural aspects, and the emphasis on the limitations as well as scope of translation studies. Now the session is open for discussion, and so I would like the participants to ask questions directly. And unmute yourself. Unmute yourself and invite one to the person, and the next person will be.
Your voice is not clear, sir.
Okay, now is it clear?
Yeah, now a little bit. I'm not getting.
Okay. Now the participants will ask questions. Just unmute yourself and then connect directly to the resource person.
Do you mean to say that now I shall be answering a few questions? That will be okay. Okay, thank you.
Please participate.
Hello. Hello, sir. I am Keshav Burkar from Alepeta. It was a nice experience to listen to you, sir.
Thank you.
But I would like to request you to elaborate one statement made by you. You said translation is a broad process. I could not understand what is meant by broad process.
No, I didn't say broad notion, I said.
Broad.
Notion.
I heard the word process.
No, no, no. Translation itself is one kind of textual process,
Yeah.
we can say, but it is a broad notion in terms of language and culture.
Okay, sir. Thank you then.
Thanks.
Sir, there is a
Hi.
question in our chat.
Any other questions? I'll be
Yeah.
happy.
Yes, sir. Listen, please.
Hello.
Why
Hello.
translate? Hello,
Hello.
sir.
Hello. Hello.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Today's webinar is very appreciative, but I would like to ask you, is there any scope of etymology in translation studies?
Etymology is quite a sort of a study that goes back, to one branch of linguistics. It attempts to trace the origin of a particular word. Okay. Now, for example, we talk of mimesis, and how mimesis came, and which are the parts of that particular word, syllables and things like that, and how a particular word is formed. It's a historical sort of a study. It's a historical study of words, we can call it.
Yeah. Okay.
In translation is actually transferring. It is a transfer or retextualize a source text into another language, and it is usually a cultural transfer. And there are several complex things that happen while the transfer takes place. So when you are translating a particular word, if you are referring to etymology, because etymology largely is connected to find the traces of words, a particular word, as it is done in dictionary. So if you think of translation at a word level, for example, why do you need to go back to the origin of the word when you are translating a text? I would ask you a question to answer it. By that, you would be getting your own answer. Would you please try to answer this question? Why do you need to go back to the history of a particular word? Etymological, sense of a word when you are translating a particular word. Because in translation, you often address the audience, the contemporary audience. For example, Vinda Karandikar translated, Dnyaneshwari. Okay. Now, Dnyaneshwari, which is actually the first Marathi text, often we call it by Dnyaneshwar, and that itself was translated by Vinda Karandikar in modern Marathi. Because Dnyaneshwari is often not intelligible to the modern readers. And he thought that he would translate it. Actually, Dnyaneshwari is one translation of Bhagavad Gita, and it is again the translation. So Vinda's modern Marathi translation of Dnyaneshwari is already a translation. Translation of a translation, something like that.
Okay, thank you, sir.
You got etymological sense of a word, You don't need to.
Yes, sir.
You don't need to think of etymological sense of word, because in translation you often address the contemporary audience. To which audience you are referring to, for whom you are writing. Now that plays a very important kind of thing, role in translation. Thank you.
No question. Yes, please.
Yes, any other question? Hello. Hello.
Yes.
Yes.
Question? Okay. So just we are in short time. So we should conduct this session. Thank you very much for the nice presentation by Dr. Deepak Borgave. I saw the participants, those who raised questions. And that's why once again, I thank Dr. Deepak Borgave.
You are not audible, sir. Hello. 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 Hello.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Deepak Borgave, sir.
Thank
You
you.
have made a very nice presentation, very detailed, informative analysis you provided. And now we shall turn to the next section of the next speaker. Before question, in introduction, I said something some about her. Professor Vinaya Kelkar. I hope that she is online. So I would request her to be online and now address to the participants online.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, participants. The audience who are wearing.
Good morning, ma'am.
Hello. Am I audible? Can you
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Hello. Is there any technical problem? Hello. Hello. Am I audible? Please respond. येतोय ना? आवाज येतोय? Okay. Shall I continue?
Yeah.
So let me go back to where I started. Good morning and good afternoon, audience who are wearing caps of invisibility and watching me. And this can probably be translated as the COVID situation. I must thank Principal Babad and the management of MVP to give me this chance, my first ever experience of the Zoom meeting, where the faces which I'm used to watching, either glittering or bored, the eyes that I'm used to seeing, either twinkling or sleepy, which give me immediate response as to whether I'm making myself clear or no? This is an altogether different kind of an experience about talking about a topic of great relevance, great importance. So let me thank Principal Bhabbar and congratulate him again for organizing this webinar. I must also thank Dr. Deepak Borgave for setting a ground for me to talk on. Since he has talked about the theory part of it, I will try to avoid the jargon. I will not enter into technicalities, and I'll try to deal with some more functional aspects of the topic. Is translated, is translation needed? Is it required? The obvious answer is yes. And I can refer to three things in this context. Number one, in 2016, the MAN group, as you know, that group which gives away the prestigious Booker prizes, announced that they will also give an award to a book in English translation. Leave aside the commercial part of it, the supplement, that the book that is published in the UK. All right, but yes, an award to a translation worth £50,000 to be shared among the author and the translator. Number two, the central government of India in 2008 launched National Translation Mission, the office of which is situated at Mysore. This chiefly, of course, deals with what we call knowledge translation, considering the need of scholars and students who want to study in various subjects, the books in which are mainly available in English, and many of whom do not have access to that language. So National Mission Translation deals with the knowledge translation. This is the second thing I want to bring to notice. And the third, that the Sahitya Akademi of India, which gives the prestigious Sahitya Akademi Awards again, is also involved in publication, and a major program, a major venture that they run is what they call Adan Pradan, translations of texts from and to Indian languages, including English. Now, these three major events, I'm sure, will wave out the question of whether translations are needed. Translations are needed, and that is why they have taken place all these years, as Dr. Borgave was trying to tell us, for time in memoriam. There has been translation. Now we talk about Indian texts to get translated into English. But you probably know that in the day of colonization, when the British ruled India, a lot many texts were translated into English, particularly from Sanskrit, chiefly because they wanted to know what is it there in the Indian knowledge house that keeps it a very solid cultural, entity for years together. So many Sanskrit texts were translated into English by particularly the English scholars who studied Sanskrit at that time. So it's always been a very important activity because, as Anthony Burgess says, I would be confined to only the boundary of one nation had translations not been there. It opens up to us a larger world of people the world that is peopled by a number of races, their thoughts, their cultures, their longings, their belongings, and their thoughts, their desires. Most of them, or at least some of them, are common with us as human beings, and therefore, in one sense, translation help us underline, highlight the fact that in the West or the East, in the Far East or the Far West, man is man everywhere. That is one reason why translations are very, very essential things. And yes, they have taken place for years together, and they'll continue to be there so long as readers are there. Let me tell you that I may appear to begin with a little disorganized, unorganized. But later on, at a later stage, I'm sure we'll be able to pick up the points and link them up together. The points that I would like to deal with is, apart from the need for translation, I'll look into very briefly the process of translation and some of the dialectics that may be involved in this process of translation, apparent dialectics. And I would particularly like to talk about translations in classrooms, the inclusion in the syllabi, which is a very, very, very welcome situation indeed. The process of translation has always been considered, and it is a very, very complex kind of, situation. I don't think I'll be wrong if I say that all human speech in one sense is translation. When I speak a sentence, I'm translating my meaning into my own language. Isn't it so? I'm translating my meaning into my own language. And even there, quite often, I feel I'm not successful. I feel I haven't been able to do it properly. I often say, please let me say it again. Or, I don't think I wanted to say that. I have something else on mind. So, when translating my own meaning into my own language often poses question marks, you can guess how difficult it would be, how challenging it would be to translate someone else's language, someone else's ideas and meanings into some other language, which sometimes is not my L1. I say that because, I have been translating chiefly from Marathi into English, and English is not my L1. My L1 is, with pride, Marathi. So I will be translating someone else's meaning into a language which is not my L1. Now, in such situations, the complexity increases. Dr. Borgave said that when Rabindranath Tagore translated himself, he could take a lot of freedom. The question freedom is often a very dangerous and a very slippery question, slippery word to use. Because, the process of translation starts with your selection of the text. If you're a professional translator, often publishers ask you to translate a particular text. And, their calculations are different to your calculations. Theirs is a commercial point of view. They obviously want to translate those books which will sell. And in most cases, it is felt that Indian books translated into English will not sell, what will sell in India in particular and also outside is, books that come from English into the regional languages. Now, this has many psychological issues involved, many political issues involved. I don't want to involve into them right now because I consider that, the way people run after books translated from English into Marathi without considering really their worth, going and buying them, spending their money, hard-earned money on them, to my mind is also a sign of our psychological slavery to the English word. I mean, I've always been a teacher of English. I taught English for 35 years, but every time I realized this slavery of Indian people to the English word. That is a different issue altogether. And as I said, I don't want to enter into it right now. But if you're not a professional translator, then the process of translation begins with your selection of a book for translation. Why do you want to translate a particular book? Is it because the writer is very famous? Is it because the style is rather experimental and something that is not done elsewhere? Or is it because it has a very important cultural echo, cultural relevance, which it is necessary to travel across India? When I'm saying all this, at the back of my mind, there is a reverberation of what Nemade said. Who's going to read your translations in English? Well, let me tell you, fortunately for us, there are readers of English translations from Marathi abroad as well. When I went to make a presentation in the East Anglia University, Norwich in the UK, I came across a number of people there who asked me about Arun Koletkar in English translation, Vinda Karandikar in English translation, and they knew Vilas Sarang, they knew many writers were either translated or bilingual writers. This is a very happy moment, no doubt about it. And therefore, it is true that even outside India, people read Indian translations in English also, so they don't worry about who's going to read it. So selection. Why do you select a particular text? Your problems as translator, your challenges as translator, your process as translator become a greater challenge depending on your intention. Number one. Number two, there is also another decision, another choice that you have to make, and that is, what do you want to do with the book at hand? Do you want to adapt it? Like there are many films adapted based on literary pieces, Omkara and all the other, films based on Shakespearean tragedies, in which Ranbir Kapoor and others acted. So what do you want to do with the text? Do you want to translate it? Do you want to transcreate it? Do you want to transform it? Let me give you an example of this. You obviously know that Pula Deshpande translated Pygmalion as Tifulrani. No? There was also another transcreation, or like it to call, based on Pygmalion story, which was done as a musical opera by the late dramatist Vidyadhar Gokhale, called Swara Samradni, in which the protagonist is a tamasha girl, tamasha dancer, and a classical singer hears her sing in a Varg Natya, and takes a challenge that he will transform her into a classical singer. She has the potential and he will do it. And both were very well received. So what do you want to do with your text? Do you want it to give the cultural nuances, background of your own culture, or want to retain that culture and slightly give it a Marathi touch or an English touch? All these questions need to answer before you touch a text. Are you taking it up because he's a famous author? He's a very reputed author. And if so, your responsibility also increases because you have no right to do anything, that will adversely affect his fame and repute. So style, content, cultural importance, knowledge, there can be various reasons for which you want to translate a particular book from one language into another. And your strategies and your managing the questions, problems, will largely depend on your intentions of translating things. But whatever may be your intention, the most important thing is, a very careful reading of the text and a proper interpretation. Now again, all these are slippery grounds, because if translation is interpretation, there are various interpretations possible. Your focus changes, interpreter's focus changes. And that is why probably it is said that no translation is an absolute translation. It's always possible to translate the same text again and again. The problem of the word interpretation adds to the problems. Let me tell you why. A word, a sentence that is written on a piece of paper is a dead sentence so long as no one speaks it out. I hope you understand what I say. Suppose a teacher comes to the class and writes on the board, "Good morning." There are various ways in which, this good morning can be actuated, can be brought into actuality, reality. Like, it can be good morning. It can be good morning. It can be good morning, or it can just be good morning. The interpretation has all these problems involved in it. It depends on the reader's mood, the reader's understanding, and yet it is true also that beyond all these things, there is something that is interpretable, which can be called as a general interpretation of the particular text. Probably this question of interpretation is minimized when it comes to knowledge translation. You're translating a book on economics, or you're translating a book on biology. There won't be much of a problem of interpretation, but this becomes a prominent problem so long as interpretation of literary text is concerned. So reading the text carefully, trying to find out various possibilities of interpretation, recreating the text mentally, and then trying to equally attentively, equally in a focused manner, recreating it into your language. Now, the moment I say translation is a creation, well, I'm entering into another slippery area. What about fidelity then? What about faithfulness then? I would like you to think whether the words freedom, creativity, and faithfulness are really opposite of each other. You can be creative and still faithful. You can be a free translator and yet faithful. It depends on the strategies that you take. And here, the translation strategies become very important. There are strategies like compensation. What is compensation? What do I mean by compensation? There are some very striking expressions in a book to which I often don't find, however hard I try, I don't find parallels in my language, in the language that I'm translating in. My language is language of translation. If the languages, say the source language and target language, have cultural proximity, probably, or the same origin, probably finding parallels will be easier. Probably it will be easier, I'm not sure, probably it will be easier to translate from Marathi into Hindi. But translating from Marathi into English or vice versa, where there is so much of cultural dichotomy, cultural difference, things become difficult. And however hard I try, it becomes very difficult for me to find, parallels. So what do? I compensate. How? If I don't find a proper, expression to show the style of the writer at a particular time, I try to do it more efficiently at some other place of translation. By so doing, it's a compromise, but it's a compensation and it's a strategy that you often have to take up as a translator, to convey the meaning and the style in the best possible way to the reader, to make it as good a translation as possible. Now again, what is a good translation? It is not always possible for you to get a certificate from the author that it's a good translation. Because many times the original writer does not have access to the translation. He doesn't know that language in which you're translating. Paulo Coelho, for example, has been translated in all world languages. He wouldn't know whether the translations are up to the mark. No. And therefore, it is not possible for me always to get a certificate, as I said, of appreciation from the author. What is a good translation then? Is faithful translation a good translation? If I go on putting a word by word synonyms, parallels in my language, that is the language of translation, does it make a good translation? Well, if that is making my translation dull, boring for the reader, I would prefer not to be faithful. I would take some liberty. And these days we see filmmakers taking liberties even with history. Yeah. So why cannot we take some liberty without harming the original text? I cannot take some liberty with the expressions and compensate for them at some other places. So good translation should be a smooth reading, an engaging reading, a reading that grips you, a reading that gives you a feel that you are reading a text which is originally written in that language rather than it being a translation. To my mind, criteria of good translation are as simple as these. That it should be readable, it should be engaging, and of course, it is the translator's moral responsibility, literary responsibility, and responsibility towards the original author that he takes limited freedom, only that which will make the text more readable into his or her language. So these are some of the aspects related with the theory that I wanted to talk about. Detailed reading is the first very important step in translation. Thoughtful reading and careful creation, including, by the way, some time back, I saw a question pop up which said, why doesn't a translator get the same status as the original writer? Well, I don't know. If he's creative, he should. But at the same time, I feel that it doesn't get that status probably because, to echo Plato, translation is one step remote from the reality, is it not? It is one step remote from the reality. That is probably the reason why he doesn't get. But yes, there is one more reason for this that I often think of. Dr. Borgave referred to various translation theories. I have come across a number of them. Most of these theories, I find, focus on the text and directly or indirectly, most of the times indirectly, discourage the translator. When Frost says translation is an impossibility, well, it is discouraging the entire activity of translation. And therefore, when I start to translate, because of all these theories, with all these theories at the back of my mind, when I start to translate, I am probably diffident to begin with. I feel probably that I'm doing an activity which is secondary. It is important, but secondary. I feel that it is necessary for a new theory to come up which will give equal status to the translator as a creator, because he's not just translating, he's recreating the text without doubt. So translation is needed for cultural proximities, for becoming more considerate about each other, because for understanding each other better, probably to make the world a better place for coexistence. Understanding each other with whatever limitations and whatever strengths, whatever weaknesses that particular people have. Or something that a translation brings to a notice. And that is why it's immensely needed kind of an activity. I'll be coming to it very soon. But translation is also a very good career option. I would like you, because there are many people who are professional translators who do not do anything. As there were very few writers who were professionally writers who did not do anything else to earn their living. Very few in Marathi. Some people like Pula Deshpande and Kusumagraj, for example, who did not work, but only wrote. So there are professional translators, which means that you can earn enough to maintain your family by only translating. Irrespective of the machine translations, I don't know what will happen with artificial intelligence, overpowering the rest in the entire world in all fields, all walks of life. But irrespective of the machine translation, there is still a large number of people who are professional translators. Now, if we need translation, if translations are needed, if it's a very important activity, then, as Dr. Borgave suggested, we also need good translators. Translators who have a sound knowledge of what translation means, who know what is the business of translating from one text into another, who are very good at both the languages. And as again, Anthony Burgess said, it is not just a matter of words, it is making intelligible the culture to other people. And therefore, it is important to be well versed with both the cultures, to be able to see the parallels, to be able to produce the parallels in your translated text. And probably this can happen when the translation enters into academia. And therefore, it's a really very grand idea, good idea to include translation into syllabi, maybe as interdisciplinary. I remember when I was a student at the university department, mine was probably the first batch to study this paper for 2 semesters, elective paper in theory and practice of translation. It was not limited to theory, it was also practicing translation, and it was made very wonderfully multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary, because the students from English department had professors from Marathi department as guide teachers. And I was lucky to have Anand Yadav as my guide teacher at that time. And we had often long discussions together. So to learn theory as well as encourage practice in student days is a very appreciable idea. And I'm happy that since then, on and off, the translation papers have always been there in the University of Pune. Now I see that the theory is done away with. I don't know for what reason. Probably the teachers can take it up in the classroom occasionally, sometimes at least. Earlier, there used to be one paper of European literature in English translation and another paper of Indian literature in English translation. Now in the latest syllabus, I see only 2 papers of Indian literature in English translation, which is also very important for us to understand, which also is indicative that a large bulk from Indian languages is being translated into English, which is a good sign again. It is a good sign that English departments are bringing into mainstream the otherwise peripheral, marginalized study areas like film studies and culture studies and gender studies and translation studies. It's really a good idea. Well, yes, it is true that translation should also be read as literature. And there are not often different criteria for translated works. In the classroom also, they'll be treated as that. Now, what is the rationale in prescribing Indian texts in Indian classrooms as translated works? Well, it is true that we all are Indians, but there are many things about India that we do not know in the real sense of the term, apart from, of course, the reality that India is divided into 2, the India and Bharat, as they call it. So India is divided, there is no doubt about it. And, many of those intelligentsia who have their linkages with the outside world seem to have lost their roots here. You see many people in India who are living in India as if in America, as if abroad, without knowing much of ground root reality. There are many allegations about Indian writers. That Indian writer does not have the variety of subjects handled as it is there in the West. That their, scope of themes is limited only to the middle class and so on and so forth. But when we read translated texts, well, the area broadens. and we really see the ground root reality of India in the translated texts, which helps us highlight, understand both the diversity and the unity that is there in India in the real sense of the term. That is one of the rationale behind introducing this, this particular paper in the syllabus. I also have noticed, as a classroom reality, one very important notion. Our classrooms are very heterogeneous. Though there is not much of urban-rural divide as we say it today, I think that divide persists even in our classrooms, even at master's level. A large class of students from our classrooms are from ICSE boards or Cambridge boards or international boards, and have studied, read a lot of English literature, mainstream English literature, and so on and so forth. Reading Indian literature in English translation is good for them for comparative study, for more comprehensive understanding of it. That is the only opportunity for them. Otherwise, they will hardly read it. That is one thing. The other thing is, there is another class, even in the university department, I noticed it, that there is another class of students who come from remote rural areas. I had students in my class who did not know that Jesus Christ and Yeshu Christ are the same figures. This is reality. Now, imposing on them only mainstream literature from the mainstream English writers is, making them more diffident, giving them more complexes, inferiority complexes, and depriving them from coming up to the levels of other students in the classroom. When they study Indian literatures in English translation, they feel more at home. This is my experience in the classroom. And the classes are more verbal, more vocal, and they are more responsive in the classroom because they feel that they are studying something which is their life, which they know. And probably with this step at the beginning, it becomes easier for them, with the confidence that they can understand, to leap to foreign authors. I always gave a reading list to my students at undergraduate level, particularly, in which my first readers would be Indian writers writing in English, who are very close to them sentimentally, emotionally, and from other aspects. The second would be contemporary American writers who have many problems which are closer to our problems. And then I would send them to, the mainstream British. My pyramid was an reverse pyramid kind of a thing. So that has a very important pedagogical point for them to study their own literature in English, giving them more vocabulary, giving them more expressions, giving them the confidence that they can understand literature and interpret it on their own, and then giving them a sort of a space from where to leap to the world literature. This is another important aspect of it. Now, understanding that translations are always interpretative, but they are deftly done, carefully done works. The translation works can have, again, a number of classroom relevances, apart from the major one that I talked to you about earlier. It's quite possible to make the classes more interactive with the help of Indian texts in the classroom. Because the social contexts are more known. Probably the philosophical aspects that underlie a book are also known, to the students. Because it's our philosophy, it's our psychology, it's our sociology that they're familiar with, and therefore classes can be more interactive with Indian writing taught in English translation in the English classrooms. The approach of a teacher obviously has to be a holistic approach. It has to be cultural, social, psychological, emotional, as well as linguistic. It'll help for a good stylistic analysis also, and will prepare a ground for a very good comparative stylistic study. There is another point that in India, there are so many literary movements that have taken place, that are taking place. But as a reader of a particular language, I'm not aware of them. When I read a Karnad, when I read Badal Sarkar, when I read a Mohan Rakesh, when I read Vijay Tendulkar in English translations, I can understand their contemporariness, their relevance to my life, their relevance to the Indian literary scenario, and their importance to the literary world of India and abroad. And therefore, this kind of a comparative study also becomes valuable from teachers' angle in a literary class. Well, there is only one more thing that I would talk about and stop there. And that is another activity that can take place in a classroom, very interesting activity, is back translation. A poem translated from Marathi into English. You can ask the students to translate it back to Marathi in, of course, a poem form. And it can be then compared with the original text. And it will be a good, very good, interesting linguistic study. If you also involve the translated text into it, it can compare three things linguistically as well. So the fact that it is a very highly needed activity, this kind of a paper will can train young scholars to be good translators. And they can take up translation as a career later. They can become professional translators. And where are translators needed? Well, they are needed in knowledge translation, and you know that National Translation Mission that I mentioned earlier has ample workshops and training programs to train translators in translating texts from various languages into regional languages, English into regional languages, and so on and so forth. And they regularly run 1 month duration courses in Mysore particularly. And they're worth, the training is worth taking. So there are knowledge translations. Translation is widely needed in media, in translating advertisements from one language into another, for example. Translating dialogues in form of subtitles is a very, very challenging, very interesting, and a very demanding, and also something that is in great demand, because there are very few dubbing subtitle writers. The subtitles, writing subtitles is a very challenging activity also, because there are time constraints, not just space, time and space constraints both. Because your subtitle has to be over by the time the dialogue is delivered on the screen. You cannot occupy more space and more time than that for your subtitle. and it has to bring in the spirit, and it has, it's a very challenging kind of an activity. And I can tell you, because I've tried subtitling some short films and some docufilms. It's very interesting. It's very challenging. And in all these, good translators are needed. So if you study the translation theory and practice as a part of your syllabus, and if you train your students accordingly, then there will not be dearth of translators doing this job more efficiently and in a more proficient manner. Thank you for giving me a patient listening. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Hello. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Now the dear participants, please raise questions or doubts to get explanation from ma'am. Participants, unmute yourselves and ask questions directly to ma'am. चॅटवरती असतील आणि डायरेक्ट विचारू शकता. ओके, हा प्लीज. हा येस. आवाज कमी येतोय सर, जरा जवळ धरा माईक. हा बोला मॅडम, ऐकायला येतंय? सरांचा प्रश्न, बोरगावे सर काहीतरी बोलतात आहे. हा
नाही, you're not clear.
हा
Borgave sir, you're not clear.
हा बोला बोला आता बोला बोला बोरगावे सर बोला. हॅलो बोरगावे सर. हा बोला बोला.
Sir, I'm not able to hear you properly. You're not audible. Dr. Borgave, you're not audible.
हा हॅलो बोरगावे सर, आवाज येत नाही तुमचा. यू आर नॉट ऑडिबल. हा बोला बोला.
Audible at all. Not audible at all, sir.
No, there is problem.
Not audible.
Doctor.
हा बोला. नाही असं करा, क्वेश्चन टाईप करा किंवा काय म्हणायचं ते चॅटवर पाठवा वाटलं तर. आवाज येत नाहीये सर. हा आवाज तुमचा क्लिअर येत नाहीये.
You are visible, sir, but not audible.
हा हा यू आर विजिबल. नो डाउट.
Hello.
हा बोला आता.
I was I was sharing some of the views that ma'am expressed.
Okay.
In the first place, the secondary status that the translators get, I mean, I have something to say about it. In the first place, it is often said that the translators do not get any recognition and things like that, you see.
Okay.
I feel that there is a lot of politics behind it. It's not just, the sort of, rewriting or rewording, business or the task that the translator does. There's something more than that in it. In the first place, in the West, for example, in the recent times, translators are getting tremendous response, and this is not happening in India because of several other factors, which are not, do not figure into the translation business as such, but there are lots of, things that which are, extra, things that are outside the translation business as such. Hello, am I audible now?
Yes, sir, clearly.
Please go ahead.
So, for example, Gayatri Spivak translated Jacques Derrida's, of grammatology, and which is, considered a classic in the, and a similar kind of translations have been done in the West. The several English texts that we read, most of them are translations. The French, the German, or the Russian, and all that, So I suppose that the culture, the new approach to translation, or what we, it's all connected to the translation culture as such. And we need to produce awareness among the people and the society at large. But unless and until there is, this culture, we spread the culture, we take this culture to the people, things will not configure, or they will not, come up as we look forward. So this is a long sort of, thing. It won't come so quickly. And translation training programs and, activities connected to this enterprise, must be, encouraged, and, we should go for all these things, I suppose. This was one thing that I wanted to share with her. Secondly, Indian texts are, they are, we feel comfortable with them reading Karnad. But reading even Madame Bovary, which is again a translation, is also comfortable. If you are good in English, you can equally enjoy magazine, Gorky, as well as, Mopassa and things like that. What is important, I suppose, is to increase the sensitivity, the language sensitivity, especially among the students and the teachers of English, including Bhabar sir, Kelkar madam, myself, and hundreds and thousands of we teachers, we have been doing all that, But right now, what kind of business is going on? I'm not aware of all these things. If Professor Bhabar can, reflect upon these things, elaborate, I would be very happy. And it was a wonderful presentation, ma'am. Thank you very much. And after so much of time, I had opportunity to listen to your voice.
Same here.
This technology is very much unfamiliar,
Yes.
and we feel a little bit scared, but still we are learning. And
Definitely, sir.
I suppose we have learned. Yesterday I told Bhabar sir that whether I'll be able to use it or not, but I did succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am, few words on that.
Actually, sometimes I feel what is said about the politics and all involved in translation, in translator getting a secondary status. I look at it from a different perspective now. That I feel if the translator does not overpower the translation, then that can be considered as a sign of good translation, I feel. You know.
Yeah.
Can we look at it at that?
Yes. It can be done.
To make ourselves more comfortable about it. And probably the second thing is more positive and probably more optimistic. The fact that the Man Group, as I mentioned earlier, has announced a prize worth £50,000 for a book translated, and half the amount will go to the translator, will probably bring good days for the translators. You know, they'll be acknowledged, they'll be appreciated, they'll be remembered as them, translators. People will ask, who translated that book? Kind of a thing. So let us hope for better things in future. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any question from other participants, please?
Hello.
Yes, please.
Hello.
Yes, go on. Please, question.
Hello.
Hello.
हा सर.
बोला.
मॅडम विनय मॅडमला त्यांनी सुरुवातीला सांगितलं होतं की आय शॅल बी फंक्शनल.
Okay.
So I send suggestions in my chat also.
Yeah.
To give certain examples that will be more beneficial for us.
I quoted some examples, I suppose. I talked about Pygmalion translation, 2 Pygmalion translations into Marathi. Dr. Borgave referred to many. In fact, you probably know that the head of my department in KTHM College, Dr. Chanke, has translated a number of texts from Marathi into English, and most of them are challenging texts. Like he's translated Kusumagraj, he's translated Baromas. He's also translated G.A. Kulkarni's short stories, challenging texts. So they're good examples.
I know that you are a good translator, madam.
Yeah.
Some example, experience particularly, taking some sentences, some phrases, sometimes like that.
Let me just share with you one line that comes to me. I don't remember accurately the line now. It was an Indira Santa line. Okay. And it said something like this. I'm not able to remember the exact line now. It read something like, माझ्या अस्तित्वाची तेलवात पेटवली, something like that. Okay, माझ्या अस्तित्वाची तेलवात पेटवली. The word तेलवात याला खूप कल्चरल कॉनोटेशन्स आहेत की नाही. एक काय म्हणायचं त्याच्याबरोबर एक सॅन्क्टिटी जोडलेली आहे, एक पूजेचा भाव जोडलेला आहे, एक अर्पण करण्याचा भाव, स्वतः बर्न होऊन लाईट देण्याचा भाव, अशा सगळ्या गोष्टी त्याच्याशी जोडलेल्या आहेत. आणि ती संपूर्ण कविता, बाकीची कविता बऱ्यापैकी स्मूथली ट्रान्सलेट झाली माझ्याकडून, पण ह्या एका ओळीशी मात्र मला फार झगडावं लागलं की हे सगळं कसं आणायचं. आणि ट्रान्सलेशन प्रोसेस मध्ये बद्दल बोलताना मी ट्रान्सलेशनच्या क्रिएटिव्ह प्रोसेस बद्दल नाही बोलले. कदाचित ती क्रिएटिव्ह प्रोसेस ही ओरिजिनल क्रिएटिव्ह प्रोसेसच्या जवळ जाणारीच असते. तर माझ्या सबकॉन्शियस लेवलवर कुठेतरी ती ओढ मला सारखी होती, छळत होती लिटरली. आणि एकदा अचानक केव्हा तरी मला सुचलं की आय बर्न्ड द कॅन्डल ऑफ माय बिईंग, असं ते करावं. आणि फायनली बिईंग कॅन्डल हे आलं आणि अस्तित्वासाठी माझं संपूर्ण अस्तित्व बिईंग हे आलं आणि आय वॉज क्वाईट हॅपी विथ द ट्रान्सलेशन. पण ते झगडावं लागतं, त्याच्यात काही दिवस जातात. तुम्ही बसलात ट्रान्सलेट करायला आणि सगळ्याच्या सगळं, म्हणजे कविता सुद्धा 8 ओळीची कविता सुद्धा ट्रान्सलेट करायला बसलात आणि सलग झाली असं होत नाही. इतके ड्राफ्ट तुमच्या ओरिजिनल कवितेचे होऊ शकतात, तितकेच ड्राफ्ट ट्रान्सलेशनचे पण होऊ शकतात. आणि त्यामुळे त्या दोन्ही प्रोसेसेस क्रिएटिव्ह प्रोसेसेस आहेत असं मला वाटतं.
थँक्यू थँक्यू मॅम.
एक्सप्लेनेशन मॅडम.
चर्चा अशीच होत राहील आणि खूप काही बोलण्यासारखं आणि प्रश्न पण भरपूर आहेत. परंतु सगळ्या वेबिनारमध्ये पार्टिसिपंट जे आहेत झालेल्या पार्टिसिपेट केलेल्या सगळ्या पार्टिसिपंट्सला मला असं सांगावंसं वाटतं की 2च रिसोर्स पर्सन्स स्टॉलवर्ड्स आहेत, काही प्रश्नच नाही. आणखी 2 तास चर्चा चालू राहील. फक्त प्रश्न असा आहे की वेळेचं आणि सगळं बंधन आहे आणि अनाउन्समेंट केल्याप्रमाणे 3रे रिसोर्स पर्सन का अनाउन्समेंट केली जात नाहीये. परंतु सगळ्यांना सांगायला थोडंसं वाईट वाटतं आहे की ज्या 3ऱ्या रिसोर्स पर्सन होत्या आपल्यामध्ये आपटे वंदना, तर त्याही असंच आणखी पुढे चालू राहिलं असतं. परंतु दुर्दैवाने काल त्यांच्या मावशीचं निधन झालं, त्याच्यामुळे शी इज नॉट एबल टू पार्टिसिपेट दिस वेबिनार. त्या आज जॉईन होऊ नाही शकल्या, म्हणून 3रं रिसोर्स पर्सन असणार नाहीये. आपल्या शेड्यूलप्रमाणे अजून 5-7 मिनिटं बाकी आहेत. तर पार्टिसिपंट्सला रिक्वेस्ट आहे की अजूनही एखाद दुसरा प्रश्न असेल तर विचारायला हरकत नाहीये. दोन्हीही रिसोर्स पर्सन्स या ठिकाणी आपल्याशी कनेक्टेड आहेत. सो मोर 5 minutes आर देअर फॉर मोर डिस्कशन्स, मोर व्हेंटिलेशन, प्लीज.
हॅलो
हॅलो, हा बोला बोला.
हॅलो हॅलो
हा बोला बोला.
हा मॅम. Hello, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, I'm very much thankful to you because you have suggested very nice activities that we can take in classrooms to develop the translation skill among the students. So I'm very much thankful to you. Ma'am, I want to ask you a question in translation. The word-to-word translation is important in translation.
Actually,
And
yes, please. I'm sorry.
yeah, yeah. So sometimes we can't find a word, in another languages also. So what should we do in this situation?
Word-to-word translation is almost impossible.
Yeah.
Words have many shades of meaning.
Not necessary even.
Not necessary also. True.
Yeah.
The necessity depends on your intention.
Equivalence.
It depends on your intention.
Parallel.
Yes.
Translator should have a command over both languages, the source language as well as the target language.
So it is not desirable, it is not possible, and therefore with so many word options that you have in your own language, you can pick up the which is closest to the original.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
It would have been better if you. हॅलो
हॅलो.
हॅलो.
हा बोला बोला बोला.
हा सर, साने गुरुजींनी जे अनुवाद केलेले आहेत, भावानुवाद वगैरे.
हो बोला.
हा, आणि ते आपल्या कल्चर मध्ये सुद्धा ते त्या कल्चर आणताना आपल्या कल्चरचा त्याला पेहरावा वगैरे देणं, हे साने गुरुजींनी फार मोठं चांगलं काम केलेलं आहे. मला वाटतं त्यांचे संदर्भ काही त्यांच्या संदर्भात थोडस जर खुलासा केला बरं होईल.
खरं ना, ला मिझरेबल वगैरे त्यांनी आणलंय आपल्या भाषेमध्ये आणि फार सुंदर ट्रान्सलेशन्स आहेत साने गुरुजींची. ला मिझरेबलचं ट्रान्सलेशन दुःखी नावाचं आहे मला वाटतं, इफ आय एम नॉट रॉंग. फार सुंदर ट्रान्सलेशन केलेलं आहे ते.
हो.
ओके, एनी मोर क्वेश्चन्स?
आणि कथा पब्लिकेशन जे आहेत.
हॅलो, हा बोला.
हा, आता याच्याबद्दल जे काही भावानुवाद आणि या ज्या संकल्पना आहेत याबद्दल जे काही सांगितलं गेलं किंवा अनट्रान्सलेटेबिलिटी किंवा पॅरॅलल्स शोधणे या संदर्भामध्ये काही गोष्टी सांगितल्या गेल्या. तर या संदर्भामध्ये 2-4 महत्वाची माझी निरीक्षणं अशी आहेत की पॅरॅलल्स हे जर एलियन भाषा असेल, इंग्रजी असेल, तर ते शोधणं फार कठीण असतं. आणि साने गुरुजींनी काय केलेलं आहे की ज्याला आपण ट्रान्सलेशन असं म्हणू शकणार नाही, त्याला अनुवाद म्हणू शकू आपण. भाषांतर नाहीये, अनुवाद आहे. अनुवाद याचा अर्थ असा आहे, अनुवाद आणि भाषांतरामधला फरक असा आहे की भाषांतरामध्ये साधारणपणे वर्ड टू वर्ड, त्याच्यानंतर त्या शब्दांचा किंवा त्या वाक्याचा घाट किंवा त्यातील शैली वजा ज्या गोष्टी असतील त्या सगळ्या तंतोतत आणण्याचा प्रयत्न हा भाषांतरामध्ये होत असतो. या उलट अनुवादामध्ये ब्रॉडर अशा गोष्टी सगळ्या येत असतात. आणि ज्ञानेश्वरी जी आहे ती अनुवाद आहे म्हणजे. आणि तिथं ज्याला आपण लूज ट्रान्सलेशन असं म्हणू, मुक्त अनुवाद किंवा भावानुवाद. आणि साने गुरुजींनी जे काही केलेलं आहे ते लार्जली ते अनुवाद आहेत. ते अनुवाद आहेत आणि अनुवाद हे देखील फार महत्वाचे असतात, ते झाले पाहिजेत. साने गुरुजी इज वंडरफुल ट्रान्सलेटर. त्यांनी फार कितीतरी महत्वाच्या अशा प्रकारच्या संहिता या आणलेल्या आहेत. आणि पॅरलल्स जेव्हा मिळत नाहीत तेव्हा याकोब्सन असं म्हणतो की ट्रान्सपोजिशन ही टेक्निक जी आहे ती साधारणपणे आपण एम्प्लॉय केली पाहिजे, वापरली पाहिजे. तर उदाहरणार्थ 2 उदाहरणं मला इथं शीर्षकांची आठवतात. हॅलो की जिनं अमुचं, हॅलो, जिनं अमुचं असं एक बीबी कांबळेंचं आत्मचरित्र आहे. त्याचं ट्रान्सलेशन माया पंडितांनी द प्रिझन्स वी ब्रोक असं केलेलं आहे. द प्रिझन्स वी ब्रोक म्हणजे इथं ट्रान्सलेशन नाही आहे, हे ट्रान्सपोजिशन आहे. ट्रान्सपोजिशनचा अर्थ असा होऊ शकतो की ज्याला सर्जक भाषांतर म्हणू शकतो आपण. की आम्ही जिनं आमचं आहे तसे शब्द आणि साईन्स आणि ते शब्द आलेले नाही आहेत. तर त्यांनी काय केलेलं आहे की त्याचे पॅरलल जे आहेत किंवा ते थीम जो आहे त्या आत्मचरित्राचा, की ती स्त्री म्हणजे संपूर्ण ती जीवन कथा स्त्रीची ती अशी एखाद्या तुरुंगामध्ये सापडल्यासारखी. अँड शी फाउंड आउट अ न्यू कॉन्स्ट्रक्ट ऑलटुगेदर. आणि हीच गोष्ट आपल्याला त्या दुसऱ्या एका ट्रान्सलेशन मध्ये आपल्याला पाहायला मिळते की उर्मिला पवार यांचं जे काही आत्मचरित्र आहे आयदान म्हणून. आयदानचं काय करायचं, तर त्यांनी असं केलेलं आहे की द थ्रेड्स ऑफ लाईफ असं केलेलं आहे. सो दीज आर द टेक्निक्स विच रोमन याकोब्सन टर्म्ड ॲज ट्रान्सपोजिशन. तर ट्रान्सपोजिशनला अधिक विशेषतः कवितेमध्ये किंवा अनेक ठिकाणी हे आपल्याला फॉलो करावे लागतात किंवा त्याचा उपयोग करावा लागतो. आणि केळकर मॅडमनी देखील याची काही उदाहरणं दिलेली आहेत. तर ट्रान्सलेशन हे बहुतेक करून म्हणजे साहित्यामध्ये किंवा विशेषतः कवितेमध्ये इज व्हेरी डिफिकल्ट यु नो. आणि हे जवळजवळ अशक्यच आहे असं रोमन याकोब्सन म्हणतात. पण तरी देखील खूप मोठ्या प्रमाणात प्राचीन काळापासून आतापर्यंत आपण कवितेचे ट्रान्सलेशन करत आलेले आहेत आणि उत्तम अशा प्रकारचे ट्रान्सलेशन झालेले आहेत.
ट्रान्सलिटरेशन जे आहे, ट्रान्सलिटरेशन पण आता उर्दू जे आहेत बरेचसे जे भारतीय आहेत आपले, उर्दू भारतीय भाषा असल्यामुळे. हॅलो,
हा बोला.
हा बोला, शेखर बोला. ओके मॅडम बोला तुम्ही.
2 गोष्टी ऍड करायच्या होत्या मला की बेबी कांबळेंच्या ट्रान्सलेशन बद्दल जे बोलले बोरगावे सर आता माया पंडितांनी, तर ते जे टायटल आहे इंग्लिश टायटल, तर त्याच्यामध्ये म्हणजे आपण ज्याला काय म्हणतो थोडंसं इंग्लिश लिटरेचरशी संबंध पण त्याचा जोडलाय त्यांनी. एकोईंग ज्याला आपण म्हणतो की नाही, की माया एंग्लाउसचं जे आत्मचरित्र आहे, वेअर आय नो वाय द केज बर्ड सिंग, हे जे ट्रान्सलेशन, तर त्या केजिंग मध्ये त्यांनी बसवायचं. कारण त्याच्यामध्ये खूप साधर्म्य आहे. म्हणजे ज्या प्रकारचं आयुष्य माया एंजेलो जगल्या ॲज ब्लॅक अमेरिकन, आफ्रिकन अमेरिकन, आणि ज्या प्रकारचं आयुष्य बेबी कांबळेंच्या वाट्याला आलं, तर त्याच्यामध्ये साधर्म्य खूप आहे. आणि त्यामुळे ते थोडंसं ते अल्युसिव्ह असं पण माया पंडितांनी केलं असं मला वाटतंय. दॅट इज वन थिंग. दुसरं मला एक थोडंसं ऍड करायचं असं की सरांनी वेस्टर्न थिअरिस्ट आपल्याला सांगितले, बरेच काही मराठी इंडियन थिअरिस्ट पण सांगितले. मराठीतून जर का आपल्याला ट्रान्सलेशन बद्दल वाचायचं असेल, ट्रान्सलेशन थिअरी बद्दल वाचायचं असेल, तर डॉक्टर अशोक केळकर, PN परांजपे, चंद्रशेखर जागीरदार आणि रवींद्र किंबहुने यांचं लेखन जरूर वाचावं. हे 4 स्टॉलवर्ड्स आहेत आपले कंटेम्पररी ट्रान्सलेशन मधले, आणि त्यांचं थिअरायझिंग जे आहे ट्रान्सलेशन बद्दलचं ते जरूर वाचणं सर. किंबहुने सरांनी फार सुंदर लिहिलं ट्रान्सलेशन.
थँक्यू मॅडम. मला असं वाटतं आता आपण इथे समारोपाकडे जायला हरकत नाहीये. तत्पूर्वी सर्व पार्टिसिपंटसाठी एक सूचना आहे की आपला फीडबॅक फॉर्म भरल्यानंतर आपल्याला सर्टिफिकेट जनरेट होणार आहे. त्याच्यामुळे प्लीज फिल इन फीडबॅक फॉर्म पार्टिसिपंट्स अँड दे विल गेट सर्टिफिकेशन ऑनलाईन. हां, दिस इट्स ऑल्सो गिवन, द नोटीस इज गिवन इन चॅट टू. दुसरं आणखी सूचना की आपल्यासाठी यूट्यूबचं जी लिंक आहे ती आपल्याला पाठवण्यात आलेलीच आहे. ती पण आपण इतरांसाठी रेफर करू शकता की त्या यूट्यूबच्या लिंकवरती आपण नंतरही झालेलं वेबिनारमधली जी चर्चा असेल किंवा जे काही आहे हे आपल्याला अगदी आरामात ॲट इज नंतरही बघता येईल, ऐकता येऊ शकेल. सो I would like to call upon the coordinator of this webinar, Giri sir, Vice Principal of our college, to propose a vote of thanks.
हॅलो 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 हॅलो.
Hello.
Thank you, sir, for organizing webinar on a very important topic. Thank you.
लिटरेचर अँड ट्रान्सलेशन, साहित्य आणि भाषांतर या संदर्भामध्ये मराठा विद्याप्रसारक समाज संस्थेचं इगतपुरी इथलं जे कर्मवीर पुंजाबाबा गोवर्धने कला, वाणिज्य आणि विज्ञान महाविद्यालय आहे, या महाविद्यालयाच्या वतीने या वेबिनारचं आयोजन केलेलं होतं. या वेबिनारमध्ये रयत शिक्षण संस्था सातारा येथील प्राध्यापक डॉक्टर दीपक बोरगावे, त्याचप्रमाणे मराठा विद्याप्रसारक समाज संस्थेच्या प्राध्यापिका विनया केळकर यांनी सहभाग घेतला. आणि या वेबिनारमध्ये अतिशय अभ्यासपूर्ण अशा प्रकारची त्यांनी मांडणी केलेली आहे. त्यांचं जे विवेचन होतं ते अतिशय सुंदर अशा प्रकारचं विवेचन होतं, अभ्यासपूर्ण विवेचन होतं. या दोघांचेही मी आपणा सर्वांच्या वतीने, महाविद्यालयाच्या वतीने, संस्थेच्या वतीने या ठिकाणी मनपूर्वक आभार मानतो. त्याचप्रमाणे या सेमिनारसाठी आमच्या संस्थेचे संचालक माननीय श्रीयुत भाऊसाहेबजी खातळे यांनी मार्गदर्शन केलं. त्यांची प्रेरणा या ठिकाणी अत्यंत महत्त्वाची होती. त्यांचे मी आपणा सर्वांच्या वतीने, महाविद्यालयाच्या वतीने, प्राचार्यांच्या वतीने मनपूर्वक आभार मानतो. त्याचप्रमाणे हा सेमिनार आयोजित करण्यामध्ये नॅकचे समन्वयक प्राध्यापक SS परदेशी सर, संगणक विभाग प्रमुख प्राध्यापक चेतन चौधरी सर, त्याचप्रमाणे भूगोल विषयाचे प्राध्यापक अरुण वाघ सर, महाविद्यालयाचे सर्व प्राध्यापक, शिक्षकेतर कर्मचारी, आपण सर्व सहभागी झालेले प्राध्यापक, त्याचप्रमाणे विद्यार्थी, अभ्यासक, या सर्वांचं मी मनपूर्वक आभार मानतो. ज्यांनी ज्यांनी या चर्चेमध्ये सहभाग घेतला, प्रश्न विचारले, त्यांचे मी या ठिकाणी मनपूर्वक आभार मानतो. आमच्या महाविद्यालयाचे प्राचार्य डॉक्टर PR भाबड सर यांनी अतिशय कमी वेळेमध्ये आम्हाला मार्गदर्शन केलं आणि हा वेबिनार घेण्यासाठी सगळ्या प्रकारचं सहकार्य केलं. त्याबद्दल मी त्यांचेही मनपूर्वक या ठिकाणी आभार मानतो. आणि माननीय प्राचार्यांच्या वतीने हा वेबिनार या ठिकाणी संपन्न झाला असं जाहीर करतो. धन्यवाद आणि पुन्हा एकदा सर्वांचे मनपूर्वक आभार.